Ian said, for the practical hands-on part, the workshops we've divided into 3 parts, using LMS, cloud-based application, and mobile applications. And I'm going to talk about using an LMS. Okay? To start with, I want to ask you 3 questions. The first is, what's your teaching context? I think that's useful for the people on your table to know. We can call them your group mates. So where are you teaching? What are you teaching? How are you teaching? Next, what LMS or VLE have you used or do you use now? Some papers make distinctions between a learning management system is this or a virtual learning environment is that, with a list of definitions. Personally, I don't buy that. For me, VLE or LMS, they are interchangeable. They're just the learning platform that you use. Ian's already mentioned Blackboard and Moodle, which I guess is going to be what the majority of you use, but maybe we have some people using different ones as well. And the third question is, generally, what's your opinion? Do you like using them? Do you think they are restrictive? Do they give you enough wiggle room to do what you want? I mean, most people here are using Moodle. I used Blackboard for 5 years. I've now been using Moodle for 6 months. To be honest, I find that there are more similarities than there are differences. From a coding perspective, I know Moodle has got a totally different approach to Blackboard. But for what I use LMSs for, which is to organize activities for my students to do both inside and outside of class, personally I find them fairly interchangeable. And I used to be a big fan of Blackboard, now I'm a big fan of Moodle. They're just tools to do the job, in my personal opinion. Now, I think the good news is that even after you start using it in a deeper manner, Moodle itself or Blackboard, it's not that difficult to use. There are point-and-click tutorials all over YouTube, which is how I taught myself basically in a week how to use Moodle. I had a full-time week because it's my job. And most of that time was spent on Moodle docs and YouTube watching point-and-click tutorials. The use of it from how to use it is very simple. Much more thought is needed about why you're going to use it and for what. Getting back to what Ian said, the 80-20 idea. 80% of your time thinking about teaching and learning activities, and maybe 20% of time spent about, okay, how's Moodle going to help me, if it's going to help me at all. I'm going to present 3 teaching and learning activities in Moodle because Hong Kong U happens to use Moodle. Okay? And, okay, one of them is use of Moodle inside the class. One of them is Moodle being used outside the class. And the other one is Moodle being used as a kind of bridge between inside and outside of class activities. Okay, so that was my criteria for these particular activities. Well, also the other criteria was I think they're good teaching and learning ideas. So I'm not going to present you 101 Moodle features. I don't have time and I don't think that's particularly useful. Primarily I'm presenting you, hopefully, good teaching and learning ideas that make some use of Moodle. Nothing fancy, there's a bit of forum, a bit of wiki, some use of PowerPoint, etc., etc. And afterwards, I'll give you some hands-on time. So you'll have about 20 minutes after I've presented to do various things. I'll give you a list of options, but maybe it's have a play with Moodle, maybe it's just discuss, maybe it's to ask questions to myself, Ian or Nikki, because we'll be coming round, whatever. So there'll be some hands-on time after my brief input. And then after that, we'll come together maybe for 5 minutes, some thoughts and feedback on what you've talked about. Okay? So, over to Moodle. These are the 3 activities I'm going to present. One, active learning actively, a problem-based learning activity, and an experiential activity. And as I said, I chose them because I thought they were 3 good examples of teaching and learning. And then I went back to Ian's model, ARCS, so gaining attention, relevance, building confidence, and satisfying instruction. And I thought, yeah, they fit this model. To me, they fit the model. Later we can discuss it. What I want to finish my session with is just asking if you have any comments or questions or observations on using a virtual learning environment, VLE, or using a learning management system, LMS, the same thing, for your teaching and learning. Are there any comments you would like to make or any questions you would like to ask?
Is anyone getting a feel for their own teaching? Just, it doesn't have to be a kind of definitive answer, but is anyone kind of thinking about their own teaching at the moment and seeing things that might be useful? Thank you. Yeah.
I mean, some faculties are actually using Facebook group or Facebook page to organize their teaching.
Yeah.
The answer is yes and no. I mean, if it's a technology that the students want to use, great, let's encourage it to a certain extent. Personally, I'm a great believer in the idea of promoting digital literacy. And when students say to me, I want to use Facebook because I'm familiar with Facebook and I don't want to use Moodle because I don't know it, my answer is generally, that's a very short-sighted view to technology. Facebook has got many advantages. The students are familiar with it. They say that it has a better interface for them. It has lots of disadvantages as well. Facebook is a transient thing. You're not controlling it, which may also be an advantage or disadvantage. I would personally I would be happy for students to use Facebook if it's for one particular activity that they can organize in Facebook. But I'm not going to be happy to have to interact with Facebook personally on a day-to-day basis to contact my students. I would rather I don't actually even have a Facebook account. But if I did have a Facebook account, I would rather keep my educational interactions separate from my personal interactions. If my students prefer not to do that, then that's absolutely fine. And for any particular given activity, if they want to organize themselves on Facebook, why not? If it's about teaching and learning, then that's great. But I'm not going to have them forcing me to join their platform when we already have a platform that's not that difficult to wrap your head around. And on top of that, if it's a new platform that's unfamiliar, you are actually building up your digital literacy skills. I mean, if I can become familiar with Moodle, then I think my students can as well. Or Blackboard, or message boards, or Moodle database, or whatever.
I'll just add to that,
Yeah.
Darren. If you're going to do it, ideally your university will have a social media use policy. There are a lot of risks involved in going out and using outside platforms. There are a lot of unknowns. You see the license agreement which runs to 30 pages, no one ever reads it. Who owns the content? What are the privacy issues? Where is its information being sold onto? What happens if the platform disappears next week? What are your backup procedures, etc., etc.? So I would exercise caution. I think, as Darren said, that if students want to self-organise, that's great. They're making best use of what's familiar to them. But I think, as Darren said, part of what we do as teachers is provide a teaching and learning environment, and we do that for a reason.
I have a friend who's doing an open university course, and she said basically the students on that course set up their own Facebook group to supplement what was going on the official site, which I think is Moodle, I'm not sure. And she said for her, it works brilliantly. They've got the official one, they've got the semi-official one. The two things work perfectly in tandem. And luckily her tutor did not say, no, you cannot do that. The tutor basically gave a similar answer, which is, if this is your self-organizing and your self-space, go for it.
Yep.
Okay, let's move on now and let my colleague Nikki talk about cloud-based services. And as I said, we're going to have more hands-on time and more time for reflection and discussion as well.